Aloha and welcome to week 12 of CM400C. I hope you had a wonderful spring break. In this lecture, I will be introducing you to Xcode, strictly for the purposes of prototyping your app in Storyboard. Although Xcode is an app development tool, designers can use it as a prototyping tool as well. In this lecture, I will walk you through a series of screens and steps that you will use to create your app prototype. Following this lecture, you should watch the online demo that I walk you through the steps that I mentioned in this lecture of Xcode. As I mentioned in a previous lecture, Xcode is Apple's integrated development environment in which you can create, test, optimize, and submit your app. Let's take a look at Xcode. I'm going to walk you through the process of starting a new Xcode project, and towards the end, I'll walk you through the prototyping process. I like to dock my Xcode at the bottom of my desktop for easy access. You can do this by opening your Finder window, selecting Applications on the left panel, look for the Xcode application, and then drag and drop it into your dock. If you want to remove it from your dock, you can select it in the dock and a black dialog box pops up and you go to Options and then remove it from the dock. From this screen, you can create a new Xcode project, check out an existing project, or find a project that you are working on in the right-hand panel. For the purposes of today's lecture, I'm going to click on Create a new Xcode project. So that's what I'm going to select. After selecting to create a new project, you will be prompted to select a template for your new project. Be sure that you highlight Application. Be sure that you highlight Application under iOS and select Single View Application in the right panel. After you do that, select Next. Now you will be prompted to configure your project. In this screen, please fill out the following. So product name, organization name, so you can put your name there if you want, organization identifier. If it's not filled in, type in com, period, and then your last name if you want. Language for now, select Objective-C, and then devices, of course, iPhone. After that, select Next. And then it's going to prompt you to save your project. Before you create your project, you will have to designate a place to save your project. It will normally default to your desktop. If you're okay with that, simply select the Create button on the bottom. You'll see your project in a folder on your desktop once you've created it. So let's take a look at Xcode. Right now, we're in the Xcode project workspace. Let me quickly go over the different parts. So this is the navigator area. The important thing to note about the navigator area is that you can access your project files. So here, if you guys recall, I named my project example. So here are all the files in my folder. And you can see that example is open right now because all the files, you can see all the files. If you click on that triangle again, it closes and then you're not able to see the files anymore. For the purposes of prototyping, you will be using mostly this file right here, main.storyboard, for your prototyping, as I mentioned. This is your editor area. Most of your coding and development will occur in this area. And storyboard appears in this area when you click on it. The utility area. For prototyping you will be doing in Xcode, you will use this area a lot. The top half is called Inspector area. In the Inspector area, you will be accessing the Attributes Inspector to make changes to the UI elements that you drop on your view controllers, which I will go over in the next slides. The bottom left is where you can access your library of objects or UI elements. So in order to access the library of objects or UI elements, you have to make sure that this guy here is highlighted in blue. And then you have the toolbar area, this area up here. This is the Run button, builds and runs the targets or your application. This is the Stop button, so this stops running your project. And I think that's it for now. And then now I'm actually going to walk you through using your Xcode workspace. So now we're in the Xcode storyboard, and how I know that is because main.storyboard is highlighted under your projects folder. and then you notice that your editor area changed, and this is the storyboard. You will be working on your prototypes mainly in this file, main.storyboard. Notice that the screen in the editor area changes to display the storyboard. The square object, so this object right here that is displayed in the storyboard area, is called the view controller. This right here is called the view controller, and you can see up here that it's labeled view controller. Make adjustments to the view controller. If you noticed in the previous slide, the view controller was much larger than the view controller you see in the slide right now. What I've done here is change the size of the view controller in the attributes inspector. So you notice that my inspector area looks different now. And if you hover above any of these icons, it'll tell you exactly what part of the inspector area that you're in. If this is highlighted, this icon here, you're in the attributes inspector. This is very, very important to remember because this is where you're going to be able to change the size of your view controller. First, you need to select the view controller. You select the view controller by clicking on it, and you know that it's selected if the view controller is outlined in blue. So now this is currently selected. Second, you need to make sure we are in the attributes inspector. So make sure that this icon is highlighted. Then you want to look for size. Use the drop-down menu to select iPhone 4-inch size. You will notice that the view controller adjusts to a smaller size. And I will walk you through those steps in the demo. Now we're going to add another view controller. Most of your wireframes consist of more than one screen. Therefore, you will have to add multiple view controllers. You add view controllers by dragging and dropping view controllers from the object library in the utility panel into the storyboard. Remember, this is the object library, and you need to make sure that this icon is highlighted. You look for view controller, and then you want to drag, click on it, and then drop it into the view controller. And then, of course, you need to make adjustments to each VC or view controller. Notice that the view controller you dropped in will be larger than your first view controller. You will need to go into the attributes inspector and adjust the size of each view controller you add to the storyboard. So I just went over how to make those adjustments in the previous slide. Next thing we need to do is embed navigation controller into your initial view controller. And how do we do this? In order to connect your view controllers, you will have to first embed a navigation controller to your first view controller. You do this by first selecting the first view controller. The first view controller has an arrow pointing towards it. So that's how you know this is the first view controller. As a reminder, it is selected when the view controller is outlined in blue. Next, you go to Editor, then you go to Embed In, and then you select Navigation Controller. This is how you embed a navigation controller to your initial view controller. Now, what you need to do is resize your navigation controller. And you do this following the same steps of resizing your view controller. Now we're getting ready to prototype. What we've done so far is we've resized the initial view controller. We added a view controller and resized the second view controller. We embedded a navigation controller into the first view controller, and then we resized that navigation controller. There are many more view controllers that you will need to add and resize. However, you still need to prepare a few more things to prototype in Storyboard. Preparing to prototype. Have your wireframe ready so you can view the order of your app flow. Have images of each screen in your wireframe. You want to have your wireframe ready so that you can view the order of your app flow. This is the app flow that you will be prototyping. And then, of course, be prepared with the images and preferably in a PNG format. So the reason why I'm going over this is because you will be prototyping for your project number 3. So this is part 1. Make sure you have your wireframe in your app flow. In my second presentation, I will be prototyping the Local IA app using Melissa's walking tour wireframe screen images and app flow. And then, as I mentioned, you need to have images of individual screens, and you preferably want them to be PNG files. Now what we're going to have to do next is we're going to have to add those PNG files into our Xcode project. You can add files as well as images to your Xcode project. Make sure you are in your project folder. Go to File, Add Files to, in this case my project is called Example. Then you need to find the images and add. So here I had the images all set up already. So locate your images. So they're on my desktop. I located my images, I highlighted them, select all the images. You want to make sure that this box here next to destination is checked. This adds actual copies of your images to your project, rather than simply a path to those images. When you're done selecting your images, simply press Add. So key thing here is make sure that this box is checked. So now we're going to place the home screen image. So this is the first image of the app flow, of Melissa's app flow, onto the first view controller. As I mentioned in the HIG Content Views lecture back in week 3, probably remember that in order to place an image into your app, you will first need to add a UI image view to your project. You can do this by adding an image view on your view controller. So how do we do this? Assigning an image to an image view. Since we want the app prototype to open up with the home screen, we want to place the home screen image into the image view. We do this by selecting the correct image from the image dropdown. So what I didn't show you in the previous slide is here we're in the objects library. We need to first throw the image view onto the first view controller, or the desired view controller. And then we're in the attributes inspector. We need to look for the image that we're interested in, select it, and then the image appears in the image view. Next thing we want to do is connect view controllers to each other. If you recall, so far, our storyboard contains a navigation controller and 2 view controllers. We've already placed in the previous slide the home screen image on the first view controller. But now we want to connect the 2 view controllers. How do we do this? Add a button that will trigger the action. In this case, it's the walking tour button on the bottom of the view controller. So we're going to, in the objects library, we're going to add a button and place it right on top of the image of the walking tour button. You will notice that the text button, you see this text here, it's a little hard to see. That's the default text that comes with a UI button element. We want to make sure that that's deleted, otherwise it can be a little confusing in the prototype. You can delete this button by going into the attributes inspector. Well, you have to make sure that the button's selected, and that's indicated by these white squares that border the outside of the button. And then here's that text button. What you want to do is delete that text. The button remains, however the text is deleted. So in the next slide, well, here's a closer look at, so we're in the attributes inspector. It says that we have the button selected, and then you delete that text there. And notice now it's been deleted. So you don't see that button text on that button there. The next thing we want to do is create a segue from view controller 1 to view controller 2 via a button. So how we do that? Now we want to be able to simulate in our prototype that when the user presses the walking tour button, it pushes out to the walking tour home screen. You select the button, so you select the button here. And once again, how do you know it's selected? It has these white squares that border the outside of the button. Centering your cursor, so centering your cursor on the button, press Control and drag the blue line. So a blue line is going to appear, and then you land it here on the second view controller. A black dialog box will pop up, and you want to select Show, and now your connection is complete. How do we know the connection is complete? This segue connection appears. and a segue arrow appears between the two view controllers. So this is a segue arrow. Simulate to check the segue. So in the prototyping process, you want to, check your prototype often, just to make sure that all your connections are being made, your buttons are responding to any touch gestures. First you want to, okay, so now we're looking at the toolbar of Xcode, and this is the top left-hand part of the toolbar. You want to set the active scheme to iPhone 5 for the purpose of this prototype. You do this by clicking on the active scheme and selecting iPhone 5. Now you can run the app by pressing the play button located at the top left-hand screen, or press Command R on your keyboard. In this simulator, we should see that the first and second view controllers are connected. It's going to be hard to make out the connection in this lecture, but when I do the demo, you'll see what I mean by the two screens. The two view controllers are now connected. So this is the iOS simulator. So what happens is I pressed walking tour, and then now it pushes out to the second view controller. And then if you press back, the simulator will take you back to the home screen. You can quit your simulator by pressing Command Q on your keyboard. Definitely make sure that the top left-hand corner of your screen says iOS Simulator before you press Command Q. If it says Xcode and you press Command Q, it will quit your project. So just make sure that it says iOS Simulator before you hit Command Q.